Welcome to Social Steps, a series of conversations with people around the world who are creating positive change and social impact. I am Luiz Guilherme, and in this episode I talk to Lynn Nanticha. She is currently working as an environmental journalist and climate activist in Thailand. She holds a bachelor's degree in communication management from Chulalongkorn University and founded Climate Strike Thailand. Her work aims to spread sustainable awareness through journalism, film, and activism. We will also discuss her experience in organizing climate movements and working as an environmental journalist in Thailand. Don't forget to subscribe to Social Steps Podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube to support our work. Let's go to the conversation. Lynn, thank you so much for your time and attention to this podcast. It's a pleasure to me and to your listeners as well. So, some questions to begin your conversation. Where are you from? What and where did you study? And how did you become interested in researching and working with environmental issues and climate activism?
Hi there, Luiz. Thanks for having me here. So just to start off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Lynn and I'm from Thailand. I'm a climate activist here and also a writer and aspiring filmmaker, I guess. I've been learning more about filmmaking. And so my work mostly revolves around telling stories about the environment and how we interact with it. And I'd say that I first got into this, maybe in the last year of high school. I had gone on exchange year, and that was when I began experiencing more of nature. And I, went hiking or all the stuff that nature enthusiasts would be quite familiar with. But at the time, I also enjoyed writing. And I wanted to become a journalist. And over time, going into university as well, I began writing more, doing more journalism, focusing on social and environmental issues. But after a while, I mostly enjoyed writing about environmental issues, and that got me into the activism world as well. And in my last year of university, that was when the global climate strike by youth around the world was happening. And I had decided to create my own one in Bangkok.
What is a typical day for you? How do you organize your work routine?
So my typical day at the moment, I do a few jobs. They're all related to writing and environment, but I work remotely. So as of now, I've been, a lot of time, honestly, with my work is spent on the laptop. And, with writing news or features or stories, there's sometimes there's that interviewing phase, talking to people, which in this past year has mostly been over phone. And then I write about them. But in the activism realm, if that's where we're getting at, is that was I was mostly active about 2 years ago when I had created all these street protests and gotten people to come mobilize and join. So that was kind of similar, a lot of time spent planning at home by myself and then putting it out there on the online world, and then people saw it, and then the actual groundwork day was only during that climate strike. On a typical, I hope that once things get better with COVID, that I'd be able to go out more and then cover stories like I used to, where we'd actually go into the field and take photos, interview people. But currently, most days are right now for me is mostly working from the laptop, and if I have like a new film project, go out to film that.
In speaking of even though we are working remotely, you already had this interaction with your people. So, what are the joys and pains of being a journalist? And when I say journalist, I'm referring to an environmental journalist. and climate activist in Thailand. What do you like, and which are the most challenging things about working in these fields in your country?
I'd say that as a journalist in my country, there's two aspects to it. As a journalist and as a journalist in my country. Um, as a journalist, I do really love journalism. Although I wouldn't classify myself to be like a complete journalist or reporter at the moment because I don't follow I'm not writing so much news, which I think journalism fulfills my curiosity. Whenever I have a question about anything, which for the past years have really been revolved around natural sciences. It helps me. I mean, I'm just really grateful to be able to have that as my work, my job, where I can ask questions and talk to the people who can answer them or go find out by myself and speaking to scientists or local communities and so on. So that's something I really love, and also writing. Um, Listening to stories from people, hearing about their lives and learning new knowledge and skills from them, and then translating that or crafting that into narrative, using words to really share these stories in a way that people would be hooked and interested to learn more. So those are the things I really love about journalism or writing or storytelling. But to get into the sides that I don't like, which aren't necessarily bad for the field, it's just maybe something that doesn't suit me, but like that fast paced world of journalism where you have to constantly be almost overloaded with information, especially nowadays when you've got social media and 24/7 always, oftentimes bad news. So I've had to, take a step back with mental health for that. But another side is, being a journalist in Thailand, like a lot of emerging countries, or like a lot of countries who have a government similar to ours, who are more perhaps authoritarian. It's been really challenging and for a lot of people probably even dangerous. Where I'd say back then perhaps environmental journalists would just would not face as many threats because in Thailand, maybe before these 5 years, that understanding of the connection between environmental and social issues weren't there. But now that people are seeing more of this connection, it's getting more political, and that's where it gets scary because now you've got a lot of journalists and a lot of activists, working on land rights, human rights issues, and so forth, and all of those are environmental justice. And under this kind of government that we have currently, which is very oppressive and censoring, trying to control the media or trying to spread fake news about a lot of things. It's really dangerous. There are a lot of activists have have just disappeared, and I'm assuming that journalists face the same fate. It's just not been covered. So that's a challenge in being an environmental journalist in my country.
Yes, I can imagine that. I can see several similarities between what is happening in Thailand and also in democratic countries like Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
For me, as a researcher, and also for friends who are environmental journalists, it's difficult to confirm data or to write about certain issues because sometimes we don't have information
Mm-hmm.
about what is happening in Amazon rainforest, for example. So yes, I can see several similarities about the native communities. By the way, I would like to ask you about the situation of native communities
Mm-hmm.
in Thailand because here in Brazil is we have many discussions about what the government is doing with these populations.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of that as well, and I'm really sorry to hear. But I do hope things get better, that the movement grows, and that more people come to realize what a precious gem the rainforest and all the cultures in it is.
Yes. And another problem is that the Amazon rainforest is quite isolated from the metropolitan areas. I don't know
I
in the
see.
Thailand if uh, the native communities are isolated from the urban areas.
They're quite isolated, but maybe some. I think it depends. A lot of them are isolated, a lot of them are not, but probably not to the extent of the Amazon forest because it's Brazil is quite large compared to Thailand, and so that proportion might vary a lot more.
What is the biggest myth or misconception about your work and within our area of expertise? And may you clarify it?
I think I think the big misconception previously, which is now thankfully changing, is that social and environmental issues are disconnected. But again, they gladly, that is changing now as more people have begin to understand, more people are creating an awareness about this. But yeah, when we speak about climate change, for example, it's not just about all the species and animal or plant species going extinct. It's about human livelihoods. It's not just about a natural disaster destroying a home. It's about a disaster that is going to devastate a child's future and health. So and that another part of it is the politics. I think in Thailand before a lot of people or still currently a lot of people still don't understand or believe that the environment is a political issue. A lot of them see it as isolated as tree huggers, let's do good, plant trees, that kind of thing, but really it's all got to do with conflicts of interest in the government or between businesses, corporations. So I think that needs to be understood more of.
Well, Lynn, fake news has become a common expression around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Disinformation has been questioning the integrity of scientists, especially climate scientists, and denied the scientific consensus. In your opinion, as a journalist and also a climate activist, how to fight climate change disinformation and fake news robots?
I think that's a really interesting question because when you say fake news, like who are you to define fake news, Like for your truth might be fake to another person. And that's what I've just learned to open up to recently. Where, as especially as an activist, you have an agenda. You believe in something strongly, such as climate change. You believe in the science, and when we people who are fighting for climate action, when we speak of science, we so strongly see it to be objective data, but at the same time, like, who are we to say that science is real, like, where where can you really verify it in information, even if it's got all sources, scientific journals, or a consensus of scientists. Who can verify that these scientists have not been, paid or all that? I hope you kind of get where I'm going. I do believe in climate change, of course, but this has this question has come up to me recently where I had met someone and I was speaking to them about climate change, and they're like, hey, I don't believe this. I'm an anthropologist, and we've seen the changes over these years, and climate change is just not really reasonable. And that started, speaking to that person who to me was a really credible person, that really made me question my own stance for a little while, and made me wonder, like, after all, we consume information of what we think is true from all this media and social media, and from we get attracted to those communities who our beliefs align with most. And so I think it's a tricky question to answer, to say, like, how do we combat fake news? in that sense. But in a sense where, okay, we're both agreeing that climate change is real, and there's fake news about from climate deniers. In that perspective, I think firstly what needs to happen with everyone is this kind of common understanding, this openness and empathy, to take on other people's views. Let's say it's hard to change other people, especially those who have opposite views from us. The more we give them information, there's this psychological effect called the backfiring effect. And so this psychological effect describes, this phenomena where if you're talking to someone who believes the opposite from you, and you give them information about your aspect, your perspective, they're only going to disagree even more and then stand stronger on their claims because that's already what they believe. And so the first thing I think for us all to open up the conversation more is just to listen to each other, to open our minds up more to listening to diverse opinions and actually take it in. Don't hold your own core beliefs, but just for a moment listen without any judgments, without constantly trying to be like, no, that's wrong. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. And then when moving on to like a more online realm is to diversify our media, our information sources. I believe that you and I must have pretty common sources for our news. The people we hang out are probably like-minded, and so that puts us in a real bubble, like an echo chamber where everyone agrees with each other. So I think it's really important that we understand these bubbles that we're becoming trapped into, and then start to open that up. And then when we begin to understand other people's perspectives, that's when we can create communication tactics that can better reach these people, because we're in their shoes. We understand what they believe, what they want, and why they don't believe the things we believe. And that's when we can begin to use different language or different points to hook them in more.
Yes, it's it's a true question. I remember I have another podcast, Green Steps, where I speak with leading environmentalists from Brazil, and I asked the same question to a friend who is also a journalist, an environmental journalist here in Brazil, and I asked the same question. She replied, "It's the $1 million question, because nobody knows exactly how to tackle this problem." Especially here in Brazil. I don't know in Thailand. Maybe it's
Mm-hmm.
a interesting discussion for another moment. But here in Brazil, we are facing a similar problem that the US is also facing. Like, if you believe in climate change, okay, you belong to a certain political party. I think the entire world has to think about this new issue. Not exactly new issue, but
Mm-hmm.
when I say new issue, I am referring to fake news in social networks. And in intergenerational sustainability and climate activism are interdefinite topics. In your opinion, how can we inspire and engage young people to take stand against climate change?
I think this so for young people, I'd say the motivation is already pretty common and prevalent, is that climate change is going to affect our lives now, and particularly our future, which the older generation might not have a lot left to live. And that's why us young people are more concerned about it, because we've been handed down this planet which is starting to become inhabitable. But I think a motivation that might apply to everyone is to motivate them to take a stance is just to apply it or relate it to every aspect of their lives. When we speak about climate change, for example, rather than going to someone and saying, "Hey, we need to combat climate change because it's going to cause the extinction of this species of animal." If you're speaking to someone who doesn't care about the environment, that argument is most likely not going to work, because to them it doesn't it's just not relevant to their lives. But if you, again, coming back to my point about understanding other people and empathizing, is when you understand what's important to them in their lives. Say, if you're a father, your kids would be important, your family would be important, or your job, keeping your job security, your food security, keeping a house. If climate change affects your business, if it affects the land you live on, or your friend in another country halfway across the world, that's going to concern you, because that comes back to you. As for, say, when it comes to climate journalism, for example, with every story I write, or I'm sure a lot of writers apply the same, is when you're writing it, you question yourself, why would this matter to the audience? Why would a reader care about this? Most likely, a lot of environmental publications already have their target audience, which is people who care about the environment. But personally, I like to keep my stories pretty open-ended, and approachable for anyone who is interested in anything. That's not really a great tactic for, coming from a communications or marketing point of view, because you should have like a target audience that's best specific. But I think if we're gonna really tackle such a global issue to humanity, we need to make everyone care about it. And climate change really does touch every area of our lives, so that makes it a lot easier for us to actually relate it to anything. If you like food, if you like animals, if you like cars or sports, it will affect everything. So it's just about finding that connection to anyone you speak to.
Which books, documentaries, animations, and or movies inspire you to work with climate activism?
Oh wow, that's tough. I'm sure there's a lot. I think maybe they weren't what inspired me, but they are what keep me going. The names I'm about to list. And if I could think from the top of my head, there's this book called Good News. It's written by David Suzuki and this other female author. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, but she's great too. Uh, so this book is just an accumulation of all these success stories on conservation, and also showing their journey. Not only showing the solutions, but also showing how they got there. And I think it's, like the name says, it's good news. At this age, we're full of bad news every day, and it's working in climate activism. Hopelessness is just really, really dangerous, because when you don't have hope for anything, you don't have motivation. Like, why would you try to save a planet that will die anyway? So hope is really important, and what's even better is having like a tangible solution. So this book, outlined all these really wonderful steps that people around the world have taken, communities that have gathered together to fight against this huge corporate giant, and yeah, just really good news that gives you hope about the work that you do. So that's one. Another book that's, I guess this one's inspired me or fascinated me, is the book Life on Earth by David Attenborough. And yeah, it's really nothing. It's like when I first read it, to me it read like a biology or geography textbook for a fifth grader. But as I got more into it, it was like it just brought me back to that childlike curiosity of like, wow, how are rocks made? Like I I wonder how many people have, asked that question, or know what rocks are made of, or what is the wind, like where does wind come from? And so, yeah, just learning those really basic natural sciences, to me, was like, it gave me this drive of like, wow, I want to find out everything there is to learn about our wonderful planet. There's just so much to uncover. That's another one. Documentaries. I recommend watching Patagonia films. It's as Patagonia is like this clothing brand that's very environmentally friendly, and I know their films. It's a lot of great PR, but at the same time, I just think it's really great filmmaking that I've been inspired to. Really great storytelling about nature and our connection to it, and this sense of adventure. I could keep going, but there's just a long list of this.
I really appreciate your recommendations, Lynn. As someone who works with disaster risk reduction, I believe it's always important to see a light at the end of the tunnel. And my next question is, well, let's imagine we have a listener who wants to work with environmental journalism, climate activism. Which books and documentaries, movies would you recommend to that person?
Well, a journalist, I'd say I would highly recommend watching a series or one of Simon Reeve's documentaries. Simon Reeve is this documentary filmmaker. Well, he's a presenter, but he's a journalist, and his documentary just brings you through. I'm really not sure how to describe it, but he it's just thrilling to watch. It brings you through this journey. I would just leave it at that. Perhaps the audience can go watch it and yeah, see what they can learn from it. So that's one. I think a good series to watch would be anything from Vox. Simply in terms of presentation style, they do a great job because whatever you're going to report, and especially for climate change because it's such a complex topic, the presentation style that Vox does is just really easily understood and it's captivating. Audiences can follow along, they can understand each point made. The visuals are great. The data is full on packed, but then it's still not overwhelming. So that's one. Planet Earth, for sure. Everyone's seen that. Another good filmmaker is Casey Neistat. He's a YouTuber, but his style is just, again, really captivating. Quick cuts, anything that's great for the audience to follow. I think these styles are really necessary, especially if you want to become an environmental journalist. I think it's important that you step out of consuming environmental journalism and then look for other sources of inspiration elsewhere in the film industry, in like the indie films, or in YouTube lifestyle vloggers. All these are great sources of presentation, and it'll also help you appeal to an audience that aren't just environmentally concerned people.
So, Lynn, my last question. Do you have any final message for those who want to create positive change, social change?
What I'd like to say to people out there trying to make a change, especially people my age, I think is really to take care of yourself. I've learned that it's like with everything in your life. When you're healthy, the work you do is good. And particularly when you're going to be a journalist or a climate activist, both of which are really, really tedious jobs and, information consuming, and especially of bad news, you're going to have to look out for your mental health. So I think it's really important to watch out for that. And the way I've found to that is to keep this kind of mindset that keeps you determined and motivated to your goals, and not getting too attached to creating big change and trying to change the world overnight, and getting frustrated with all these bad guys in in the game, but just to stick to what you really enjoy. Look to the good sides every day. Read some good news, and yeah, like make sure you do your work because it's enjoyable. As much change as you're trying to create, I think a lot of us activists do end up getting really, really burned out because we're really fixated on, trying to fix problems. And there's just so many problems in this world, and a lot of them just seem to be getting worse every day. But I think it's really crucial to look out for the great progress that we're achieving each day, and also to not get too fixated on achieving them. If things don't work out, it's fine. I come from it as like maybe from a Buddhist perspective as well, of like, we're all gonna die anyway, so why get so frustrated or angry during this lifetime? And I do believe in good positive vibes, as they say. When you try to do proactive, optimistic things for your community, I believe that your community reacts back. When they see you kind of radiating that good energy and doing great things that benefit not only everyone else but also yourself, people want to emulate that, and that becomes like a ripple effect onwards.
Nice words, Lynn. And thank you so much for joining us today, Lynn.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to recommend social steps to your friends who also want to create a positive social change. If you are interested in a Brazilian podcast, consider listening to Green Steps, my other podcast where I speak with leading sustainability professionals from Brazil. You can find the entire series of episodes on my website. Use the link I wrote in the description of this episode. Social Steps will return as soon.